imagine for a second that you are one of the most consequential figures in the history of the Western world. Your ideas have toppled governments, they've shaped modern economies, and they have just fundamentally rewired how millions of people view their own existence.
You're a titan.
You are a titan. So when you die, what kind of monument do you expect? A cathedral, marble mausoleum, maybe a massive statue in the town square of the city you basically built?
Yeah, that's the standard operating procedure for historical giants, right? We like to leave a mark. We want the plaque.
Right. But get this. The man we are talking about today, a man who arguably defined the Protestant work ethic and the structure of the modern church, he specifically requested to be buried in an unmarked grave.
No headstone. No monument.
Nothing. He wanted to be completely forgotten so that no one would ever be tempted to, venerate him. And to this day, nobody knows exactly where his bones are.
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The man who tried the hardest to disappear arguably left the deepest footprint on the modern world.
We are, of course, talking about John Calvin.
No.
And I know just saying that name, Calvin, might spike the blood pressure of some listeners. For some, he's this theological hero, the guy who got it right. For others, he's this severe, joyless tyrant who ruined religion with guilt and rules.
And that's usually the case. The caricature just eats the reality.
Looking at the research you pulled together, it seems like that's exactly what happened.
The mistake most people make is stopping at the biography, the beard, the funny hat, the severe portraits. To really understand John Calvin, you have to look past the man and look at the system he built. He wasn't just a preacher, he was an architect.
An architect, I like that.
He took a chaotic protest movement, the Reformation, and he turned it into a logical, teachable framework that could survive for centuries.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We aren't doing a dusty history lesson. We are going to unpack the system. We're going to decode that famous acronym, TULIP, which sounds lovely, but it's actually some pretty heavy-duty theology.
Very heavy.
And we're going to look at the great debate between Calvinism and Arminianism that still divides people today.
And what's so critical here is that we are really looking at the source code of modern evangelical thinking. Whether you agree with his conclusions or, find them repelling, you can't really understand the Western church or even Western individualism without understanding the blueprint Calvin drew up.
So let's start with the architect himself. I think the most surprising thing I found in the notes is his background. When I picture a theologian from the 1500s, I picture someone raised in a monastery, championing in Latin since they were 5.
Right.
But Calvin wasn't training to be a priest originally, was he?
No, and that is the absolute key to understanding him. John Calvin was born in 1509 in Noyon, France, and his father actually steered him toward law.
Law, not theology.
Exactly. He was trained in the humanities, in logic, and in the legal system. He wasn't sitting in a cell. He was learning how to construct an argument.
That explains the tone of his writing. I've tried reading some other reformers, like Martin Luther, and honestly, it feels like being shouted at in a pub.
Yes. It's emotional, it's fiery, insults are flying everywhere.
Yeah.
Luther is the bombastic revolutionary who kicks the door down. He's the brawler. Calvin is the cool, organized lawyer who walks in afterwards to write the Constitution.
So he writes like an attorney building a case.
He's precise. He defines his terms. He anticipates objections. He systematizes the passion of the Reformation.
So how does this French lawyer end up running a religious revolution in Switzerland?
Well, in his young adulthood, he experiences what he later called a sudden conversion. He moves from Roman Catholicism to the Protestant faith. And we have to remember, doing that in France in the 1500s wasn't like changing your political party.
No, this was a capital offense.
It was treason. The notes mention he had to flee France to avoid being burned at the stake.
So he's a refugee.
He's on the run, living under assumed names. And he eventually stops for the night in Geneva, Switzerland, intending to stay just one night before moving on. But the local reformer there, a guy named William Farel, literally threatens him with God's curse if he doesn't stay and help.
Seriously?
Yeah. So terrified, he stays.
And Geneva becomes... what? It wasn't just a hiding place.
It becomes the headquarters. Think of Geneva under Calvin as like the Silicon Valley of the Reformation.
An incubator.
Exactly. Calvin wasn't just preaching on Sundays. He was building a training center. Refugees were pouring in from all over Europe, France, Scotland, the Netherlands, fleeing persecution. And Calvin trained them, drilled them in theology, and sent them back out as missionaries.
It's almost like a special ops training ground.
In a way, yes. But the weapon wasn't a sword, it was a book. And this brings us to his magnum opus, the Institutes of the Christian Religion.
I've heard of this. It's massive. Why
Yeah.
does this specific book matter so much?
Because before the Institutes, the Reformation was a bit of a mess. You had Luther shouting over here, Zwingli over there. It was scattered energy.
Right.
Calvin took all these new Protestant ideas, which were mostly just anti-Catholic at that point, and he systematized them. He organized biblical doctrine into a coherent, logical whole.
So he took the revolution and wrote the textbook.
He grounded the church in sola scriptura, scripture alone, but more importantly, he showed people how to read the Bible as a single, unified story. He made the theology defensible, and crucially, he made it portable.
Portable.
You could take the Institutes anywhere in the world and rebuild the church from scratch.
Okay, so that's the man of the lawyer turned theologian who organized the chaos. But now we need to get into the meat of it. The idea is when people say they are Calvinist today, they are talking about a very specific view of God.
Right. If you want the one-sentence summary, the central gravity of Calvinism is God's sovereignty. It's the idea that God is the primary actor in the universe. He is in complete, total control of salvation, history, everything.
Nothing happens by accident.
Nothing.
And this brings us to the flowers. The acronym TULIP.
Yes, TULIP. And a quick disclaimer, Calvin didn't invent this acronym. It was developed years later by his followers to summarize the response to his critics. But it serves as a perfect table of contents for the whole system.
Okay, let's walk through these because frankly, the terms can be a little aggressive to modern ears. The T stands for total depravity. Now, that sounds like you're calling everyone a monster.
It does sound like a horror movie title.
Like we're all serial killers in waiting.
But in this theological system, total depravity is a technical term. It doesn't mean people are as bad as they could possibly be. It doesn't mean everyone is a murderer. You can be a depraved person and still be a nice neighbor who bakes cookies and pays taxes.
So what does it mean then?
It means that sin affects the total person. Every faculty of a human being, the mind, the will, the emotions, is tainted by sin. The core idea is that humans are spiritually dead.
Not sick, not injured, dead.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction. A sick person can take medicine or reach out for a doctor's hand. A dead person can't do anything.
Right.
Because we are dead in sin, we are unable to come to God on our own. We don't even want to. We are morally unable to choose the good.
Which sets up a pretty hopeless situation, which I assume leads to the U, unconditional election. This seems to be the one that makes people the most uncomfortable.
It is the hardest pill to swallow for the modern mind, which loves democracy and fairness. Unconditional election means that God chooses to save certain people, the elect, based entirely on his own will and secret purpose.
And just to be clear, he's not choosing them because they are nice people or because he looked into the future and saw they would be good Christians.
No, that would be conditional election based on a condition you met.
Yeah.
Calvinism argues that before the foundation of the world, God picked a people to save, and it had zero to do with their merit, their personality, or their future choices. It's a gift. It's not a reward.
It feels arbitrary, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I pick you, but not you.
To the human mind, yes. But Calvin would argue it's not arbitrary, it's just mysterious. And he would flip the script. The surprise isn't that God doesn't save everyone. The surprise is that he saves anyone.
Oh.
If we are all rebels, God owes us nothing but justice. The fact that he grants mercy to some is, in Calvin's view, an act of overwhelming grace.
Okay, moving to L, limited atonement. I've also seen this called definite atonement.
Many theologians prefer definite because limited sounds like Christ's power is lacking. But the concept is about the intent of the cross. When Jesus died, who was he paying for?
The standard Sunday school answer is everyone.
Right, but Calvinism asks a logical question. If Jesus paid for everyone's sins, why isn't everyone saved?
Because they didn't believe.
But isn't unbelief a sin? Did Jesus pay for that sin or not? If he paid for it, why are they punished for it? You can see the lawyer coming out here.
I see the legal trap. If the debt is paid, you can't collect it again.
Exactly. So Calvinism teaches that the atonement was specific. Jesus didn't just make salvation possible for everyone if they accept it. He actually effectively paid for the sins of the elect.
A check cleared.
The check was written, cashed, and cleared for a specific group of people. It's a targeted rescue mission, not a lifeboat thrown into the ocean for whoever can swim to it.
That's a great analogy. Okay, irresistible grace. This sounds a bit like mind control.
It's often misunderstood as God dragging people kicking and screaming into heaven against their will. But remember that, to me, we are dead in sin. We naturally hate God's rule.
Right.
So irresistible grace means that when God calls one of his elect, he performs heart surgery. He removes the heart of stone and gives a heart of flesh. He changes their desires.
So it's not that I'm forced to believe against my will, it's that my will is changed so that I want to believe.
Exactly. Think of it like food. If you hate broccoli, I can't force you to like it. But if I could magically change your taste buds so that broccoli tasted like your favorite dessert, you would eat it freely and happily. You're doing what you want, but your wanter has been changed.
I like that, the wanter. Got it. And finally, the perseverance of the saints.
This is the comfort clause. It means that those whom God has truly saved, he will keep. They might struggle, they might stumble, they might have seasons of doubt.
But they won't ultimately fall away.
They won't. It's the once saved, always saved idea, essentially. But with the caveat that they persevere in faith. It's not a license to do whatever you want. It's the assurance that God won't let you go. Your security rests on God's grip on you, not your grip on God.
So if we synthesize this, the big idea of the Calvinist system is that salvation is entirely a monologue by God. From the selection to the payment to the changing of the heart to the keeping of the believer, humans contribute. Zero.
Zero. According to this system, humans contribute nothing to their own rescue except the sin that makes it necessary. It is, as the Reformers said, soli deo glory to God alone.
Now, obviously not every Christian sees it this way. In fact, most people I know probably don't, or they instinctively recoil from the idea of God picking and choosing. This brings us to the great debate.
Yes.
Because there's another framework that stands in contrast to Calvinism, known as Arminianism. And just to be clear for everyone, that's Arminian with an I, named after Jacobus Arminius, not the country Armenia.
Right. And before we set up the cage match, it's really important to note what they agree on. Both are Bible-believing frameworks. Both believe in salvation by grace. The debate isn't about if grace saves. It's about how grace works.
Okay, let's do a side-by-side. Because I think the Arminian view is often the default setting for modern people. We talked about the human condition. Calvinism says we are dead. What does Arminianism say?
Arminianism agrees that humans are fallen and sinful. But they believe God gives something called prevenient grace, grace that comes before. This is a blast of grace that goes out to everyone.
And what does it do?
It neutralizes the effects of sin just enough to enable every single person to make a free choice. It restores the faculty of the will, so to speak.
So Calvinism says God has to breathe life into you before you can believe. Arminianism says God gives everyone the capacity to believe, but you have to make the move.
Correct. In Calvinism, regeneration precedes faith. In Arminianism, faith precedes regeneration.
And that shifts the view of election. We said Calvinism is God choosing based on his mysterious will.
Right. Arminianism argues that God's election is based on foreknowledge. He looks down the corridor of time, sees who will freely choose to accept the gospel using that prevenient grace, and he elects those people.
So in Arminianism, the human vote is the deciding factor.
Yes. In Calvinism, God's choice determines your faith. In Arminianism, your faith determines God's choice.
And that leads to the mechanics of grace. We said Calvinist grace is irresistible. I assume Arminian grace is resistible.
It has to be. For free will to be genuine in their view, God offers salvation to everyone. He makes it possible for everyone. He desires it for everyone. But he allows the human the final veto power. You can say no.
And finally, security. Calvinism says God keeps you.
Historically, Arminianism has taught that because you freely chose to get in, you can, by persistent unbelief or sin, choose to get out. Your security is essentially a partnership. It depends on your continued faithfulness.
This raises a huge question. Why does this theological hair-splitting matter to someone sitting in a pew on a Tuesday morning? Why should they care?
It completely changes the emotional vibe of your faith. For a Calvinist, the emphasis is on security and awe. You know your salvation doesn't depend on your shaky performance, but on God's unchangeable decree. That is very grounding for people with anxiety.
You can fail, and God still holds you.
Exactly. But for the Arminian, the emphasis is often on urgency and responsibility. It highlights the importance of the personal decision. It feels very active. It empowers the individual.
But the shadow side can be the fear that you might lose it if you mess up.
It puts the burden of staying saved on your shoulders, yeah.
Okay, I want to clear up some myths, because when you talk about God controlling everything, people start to get nervous. One of the biggest myths is that Calvinists don't believe in free will, that we are just robots following a script.
That is the most common misunderstanding. Calvinists do believe people make real choices. You chose what to have for breakfast today. God didn't force a spoon into your mouth, but they believe those choices are shaped by your nature.
What does that mean? shaped by nature.
Think of water. Water flows downhill. It does so freely according to its nature. It never chooses to flow uphill. Calvinists say our nature is sinful, so we freely flow downhill towards sin. We need a new nature, a pump, if you will, to flow uphill toward God.
It's not about being a robot. It's about being a slave to your own desires until God sets you free.
That's it.
Here's another big one. Calvinism kills evangelism. If God has already picked the winners, why bother preaching? Let's just stay home and watch football.
Logically, you might think that leads to laziness or fatalism, but historically, it's the exact opposite. Geneva was a missions hub. Some of the greatest evangelists in history, like George Whitefield or William Carey, were staunch Calvinists.
How does that work? How do you reconcile it's already decided with I need to go tell them?
2 reasons. First, obedience. God told them to go. Second, they believed that preaching is the means God uses to save people. They don't know who the elect are, only God does. So they preach to everyone.
So they aren't trying to convince God to save people. They are gathering the people God intends to save.
Exactly. They preach with confidence. They believe God would definitely save some of the listeners, rather than hoping someone might decide to be saved. It turned predestination into fuel for action, not an excuse for passivity.
That's a really interesting twist. So as we look at the modern church, even if someone isn't a Calvinist, how has John Calvin influenced them?
Oh, his fingerprints are everywhere. If you go to a church where the pastor opens the Bible and preaches through it verse by verse, that's called expository preaching. Calvin popularized that.
In worship styles, too.
Yes. Calvin pushed for simplicity. He stripped away the statues, the complex rituals, the incense. He wanted the focus to be entirely on the mind engaging with God. If you walk into a modern evangelical church with a simple stage, a band, and a focus on the sermon, you are seeing Calvin's legacy. He shifted the center of gravity from the eye to the ear.
Which brings us back to that psychological benefit you mentioned earlier, assurance.
That is huge. We live in a world of performance. You have to earn your promotion, earn your likes on social media. Calvin's theology offers a radical counter-narrative. You are accepted because of what God did, not what you do. For many, that is the most liberating thought imaginable.
Which brings us full circle to that unmarked grave we started with.
It does. John Calvin died in 1564. He was practically the ruler of Geneva, a man of immense power, and yet he insisted on an obscure burial.
It really aligns with that core theology we discussed. Soli Deo Gloria.
To God alone be the glory. That was the heartbeat of his life. He really believed that if people made a shrine to him, they would be distracting themselves from God. He wanted to be a transparent window that people looked through to see Scripture, not a stained glass window that people stopped to look at.
So what does this all mean? We have this French lawyer who never wanted to be famous, who built a system that claimed humans are helpless, and who arguably shaped the modern West.
He shifted the center of gravity. Before Calvin, for many, the center was the church as an institution, the hierarchy, the sacraments. Calvin shifted the center of gravity to the Bible and the individual's direct relationship with a sovereign God.
Whether you buy into the TULIP or find it repulsive, you kind of have to respect the intellectual rigor.
You do. He wasn't just a harsh theologian. He was a pastor who wanted to give people a rock-solid foundation that wouldn't crack when life got hard. He wanted them to know that their standing with God was fixed in eternity, not fluctuating with their mood.
And that is a fascinating place to land.
It is.
I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We live in an era of personal branding. Everyone wants credit. Everyone wants a legacy. We build monuments to ourselves on social media every single day. Yet the man who arguably had more influence than almost anyone else in his century insisted on being forgotten so that his message would be remembered.
It raises a powerful question. What is the nature of true influence? Is it about your name being known or about your ideas taking root?
It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into John Calvin. We will catch you on the next one.